So welcome. My name is Caitlin Sullivan. I am with the Aerospace Industries Association. I'm the director for the American Rocketry Challenge. So if that is where you were trying to find, you are in the right place. I'm going to stop sharing for a moment here so I can greet everyone. All right, let's admit a couple more people as they're coming in. There we go. All right. So it is so exciting to see so many of you. I see some familiar faces from last time. Good to see all of you again with us. So excited this evening to be hosting our second Launchpad Live for the American Rocketry Challenge. I know some of you have been following along with all of the offerings that we have, and we're so happy to see you back again. We are just really proud of the work that you are doing. You are getting started early in the season, which we love to see, and we know that you're going to do great things this year. So congratulations on already being off on the right foot. I am so pleased to announce our speaker this evening, to introduce you to our speaker this evening. Her name is Barbara Braun, as she is joining us from the Aerospace Corporation. Before I tell you just what Barbara does, just a reminder that we are recording the webinar this evening. So if that is of concern at all, feel free to turn your camera off, but we do love to see you, and we're excited to hear your questions in just a minute. Barbara is, and I'm going to hope I get this right, Barbara, but lucky that she's here to fill us in the information. Barbara is Assistant General Manager of the Agile Acquisitions Division within the Defense Architectures and Integration Office of the Aerospace Corporation. And so no worries if you don't know what that means, because Barbara is here to tell us today. As she is speaking, if you have questions, go ahead and put them into the chat. We've got some folks here who will be helping to answer some of those questions. Barbara will be available for Q&A afterwards. And at that point, we're also going to ask you if you feel like coming off mute and asking questions, then we would love to have all of you join us for that as well. All right, Barbara, please take it away. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. First of all, can you hear me okay? Is everybody hearing? Excellent, great. I am so excited to be here with all of you tonight. I love talking to kids who are interested in science or interested in rocketry. I am Barbara Braun. I am an assistant general manager at the Aerospace Corporation, and all of the rest of the introduction you don't have to worry about. What I do for the Aerospace Corporation is basically I help the government and NASA and the Department of the Space Force and all the rest buy satellites, launch satellites into space using big rockets. But what I really want to talk to you about today is some work that I did with other members of my company, where we did what is called an analog mission to Mars. And before I go into that, I'll just give you a quick summary of how I got to where I am right now. I started out as a kid interested in science and engineering, just like all of you. I joined a bunch of clubs like you have done, and I participated in the types of challenges that you are participating in when I was in elementary school and high school. And then when I went to college, I decided I wanted to study aerospace engineering. I was really inspired by the space shuttle, by the astronauts, by the development of the International Space Station, which was going on at that time. And so I studied aerospace engineering in college. And then after college, I went to work for the Air Force. I was an active duty Air Force lieutenant. And I served in the Air Force for an active duty for about 6 years. And then I was a reservist for a long time. But after I left active duty, I got hired by the Aerospace Corporation. And what we tend to do is to work to help people all across the US and even internationally build and launch satellites, do rockets, work with NASA on Earth observing satellites and on Moon to Mars missions. And I think that the next chart that we have is maybe a short video of what the Aerospace Corporation is all about. And then we will get into the fun mission that I did to Mars, or really to the Mars Desert Research Station. So I think they're going to play the video now. All right. So that was just the quick sort of fancy video from the company. But what I really want to talk to you about is the mission that I performed in December of 2022, where I went to a place called the Mars Desert Research Station, and I did what is called an analog mission to Mars. And I'll talk to you in just a second of what I mean by analog mission. But first, I want to introduce you to the crew that I worked with. You can see me down there in the front. But I also had these wonderful people that I was working with. Christine Ferrone, who's the commander. I don't know if you can see cursors or anything, but she's kind of in the back next to the tall guy, Alex Diaz. And she was the commander of our mission. And Alex Diaz was our advisor. And then the person right in front of Alex, who's Ashley Kowalski, she was our crew engineer. And the other two, Matt Eby is right next to Ashley, and Trevor John is right next to, right up above me, and then there's Allie Taylor. Ashley and Christine and Alex were especially helpful because they have done these types of missions before. So what do I mean by an analog mission? Well, let's go to the next chart here, and I can describe what it's like. So what is an analog mission? Well, first of all, I have to disappoint perhaps people who are hoping to hear from somebody who's actually been to Mars. I did not actually go to Mars. What I went to was a place in the northern Utah desert that we call an analog for Mars. And what I mean by that, if any of you do theater or if any of you were on sports teams, you don't just show up on the night of a show and perform without doing rehearsals ahead of time. And you don't go into a football game without a lot of practice and scrimmage and all the rest. So an analog mission is kind of like that rehearsal or that scrimmage or that practice that you do. And we tried to make it just like sometimes in a game, you try to make it as realistic as possible where you're playing against other people, or in a rehearsal when you're doing a dress rehearsal and you have lights and costumes and everything. We try to do analog missions as close to how you would actually do a real mission to Mars. So this allows us to test things out as if we were on Mars. It allows us to do science experiments and figure out how they might operate if we were actually in spacesuits on Mars. It lets us figure out what we need to change about our planning, what we need to change about the setup of our experiments, what do we need to do to live and work in space, just like a dress rehearsal or a practice for a game. And you can see on the right-hand side here a bunch of those similar types of analogs. They tend to be done, a lot of the analog pictures that you see right here are for moon missions, right? So you do them in places that look a little bit like the moon, and you put on spacesuits just like you would on the moon. You put on rovers, just you climb into vehicles and you test out the vehicles like you would use on the moon. So I went to, again, the northern Utah desert, to a place called the Mars Desert Research Station. And we spent a couple of weeks pretending as if we were on Mars. And I'll talk a little bit about what that entailed. But first, if you go to the next chart, I'll just show you a little bit of what the Mars Desert Research Station, the habitat that we lived in, looked like. So you can see kind of over on the very left-hand side here, that round, kind of tallish building that's there. That is what we call the habitat. That was our main living quarters, and there's a little map there in the middle that shows you what it looked like on the inside. Down on the first floor, we had workbenches, we had some lab space, and then we had what we call the extravehicular activity prep area, and that's where we would get into spacesuits and put on our breathing apparatus, and then we would go into this what we call the airlock, and that airlock we would have to stand in. Now, we didn't actually pressurize and depressurize like you would have to do on Mars or in space, where the air pressure is either absent or it's a lot less than it is on Earth. But we did have to stand in that airlock for 5 minutes every time we wanted to go out and every time we wanted to come back in. And then if you go up the stairs, there's a little set of stairs up there. If you go up the stairs, you come to kind of our living quarters, and you can see those little bunk rooms, and they're a little hard to tell in this diagram, but they're kind of right on top of each other. They were about the size of a small closet. There was basically room for a bed and a tiny little desk, and you either had kind of the bed on top of the desk area for the person beside you, or you had it underneath the person beside you. And that's where we slept. And then we prepared all of our food at that little dining table. That's where we hung out when we were not going out for an EVA. That's where we, we did some of the data analysis for some of our experiments. And there were a few other places within this habitat. If you can see that round circular thing there, it's actually designed to be to fit within the fairing of a big rocket. And so it was shaped like you would when you would launch to Mars. And we lived mostly in there, but if you went through some of these little covered tunnels, you can see the science dome, that kind of dome-shaped thing. That is where we would do, we had a bunch of scientific equipment, and we'd do some of our experiments in there. And then the other thing that you can see over here that says RAM, that was what we, repair and assembly module. That's where we would fix things that broke. And I'll talk a little bit more later on about the things that broke and what we had to do to fix them. But all of this, as you can see, is, it looks a bit like the Mars desert. And I think if you go to the next chart, you can see a little bit more of that. So this is in northern Utah, the desert of northern Utah. And these are some pictures that we took while we were out on the mission. And you can see, especially in the picture on the left and the picture on the right, you can almost imagine that this is on Mars if you would just ignore the blue sky and the clouds. It's a kind of a rugged terrain with a lot of sort of hilly mountainous areas. One of our crew members points out that part of the reason why this looks so much like Mars is that if you know anything about Mars, you know that in the past, Mars was a lot more like Earth. It had it had weather, it had rainstorms, and so this canyon area here is carved by water, but it doesn't have anymore a lot of surface water. So it's a lot like the surface of Mars in terms of the terrain. That looks like it was carved by water, but there isn't an awful lot of water left on the surface. And the dirt in that area is not as fine as maybe the dust on Mars, but it's a lot like what you might encounter in Mars. And that's why the Mars Desert Research Station is located where it is, because it helps you interact with the environment as if you were actually on Mars. So what did we do while we were there? Let's go on to the next chart, where I'll talk a little bit about the research that we did. And this is just a few of the experiments that we did. Kind of starting from one side and going all the way around the circle here. We had a mirror surface coating experiment. And for this, we basically, when you go up and you bring a lot of scientific equipment to the moon or to another planet, especially if you're on Mars, which does have some weather and some wind, and a lot of very fine-grained dust particles, those mirrors would get scratched, and those optics that you might be using for telescopes or microscopes could get damaged. So we were experimenting with different ways to cover up the surfaces of those mirrors in order to determine what works best to keep them from getting damaged. We talked about how Mars has weather. We actually launched a high altitude balloon. Matt Eby was in charge of this. He's launched an awful lot of high altitude balloons that carried a bunch of instruments that would tell us a little bit about the upper air currents. If you're on Mars and you don't want to get caught in a dust storm, you don't have, the Weather Channel on Mars to be able to tell you what's coming. So you have to kind of figure it out yourself. And if you don't have a lot of observations from around the planet, you'd send maybe a high altitude balloon up and it would take those measurements and transmit them to the ground. So we did that. One of the more interesting and fun experiments was Trevor John is there showing his phantom virtual reality, augmented reality demonstration. The idea behind this is that there's probably not going to be the humongous team of scientists and engineers going to Mars with you that want to do research on Mars. So how do they tell you what to look at and where to go and what they want you to do to be essentially their eyes and hands? Well, you can do that with using virtual reality goggles. And so we would use a little drone that we had, and we used a little rover that we had, and we used some of the big rovers that we have to essentially video and map out the terrain around our habitat. And we would upload that to the scientists back on quote Earth, and they would create a virtual reality for us. And then they would say things like, okay, I want you to go and examine that rock over there and get a sample of that rock for me. I want you to go down to this canyon over here, and we could see it in our heads-up display. We checked out what we call these extravehicular activity tools. These are basically just things that you could buy in the store, maybe for scooping up the stuff that your dog does. But it's also useful for taking samples of the environment. So if you want to figure out what the Martian surface is made out of, you would want to scoop this up, put it in a container, bring it into the laboratory, and then use that equipment to analyze it. In addition to this, we had a couple of other things that had to do with living and essentially being human beings on Mars, and being within the habitat. And that included things like, how do you exercise when you were on Mars? I like to run, and that's my main form of exercise. But if you're pretending to be on Mars, you can't go out and run around outside of the habitat. So instead, we worked on different ways to create essentially artificial gravity so that we could do weightlifting in the Martian gravity, which is, I think, about a third of that of Earth. And then another had to do with how do we stay in touch with our friends? While we were in the Mars simulation, we couldn't call folks because if Mars is so far away from Earth, it takes anywhere from 5 to 20 minutes for a text message sent here on Earth to go at light speed to Mars, depending on where Mars is with relationship to Earth. So we actually created a little server. It's a Discord server for those of you who might be gamers, that would delay all of our text messaging back and forth to our family members. And we use that to see how that would, with different delays, how that substituted for not being able to call your family and friend. Could you just text them? Does that help improve morale and so forth? So all of this was sort of things that we did. And then if you go on to the next chart, you can see a little more of that. Let's see here, next chart. When it gets there. There it is. So here on the right, you can see myself and two of my crewmates, that's Ashley and Christine, who are using those EVA tools to kind of collect dust on the surface. You can see Ashley in the middle doing the mirror coating experiment in the science lab there. And on the left side here, you can see that I'm troubleshooting one of our spacesuits. And this was one of the things that I learned from this mission here, and that is that you have to be really, really handy when you are isolated in even in an analog environment. If our spacesuits broke, and they did, it turned out halfway through our mission, our spacesuits kind of started not to be able to hold enough battery charge, and they would start to fade, but only about 5 or 10 minutes into our EVAs, and we'd have to come back inside, and we couldn't do our science objectives. Well, it turned out that there was a problem with some of the connections to our batteries, and I couldn't call an electrician or even ask a friend to come and rewire them up. I had to solder them together myself. And similar things happened with, for example, our toilet, right? Everybody always wants to know, how do you go to the bathroom in space? Well, we had a toilet that's a little bit like what you might use in a camper, right? It would basically hold all the waste there, and it clogged up, and I couldn't call a plumber. I had to go and do the dirty work myself to unclog that toilet and to make it work again. So this is one of the things that I think is kind of cool about living and working in outer space, especially about the future of living and working in outer space, is that space for so many years, you have to be the top of the top or the elite of the elite, or have a bunch of different college degrees or a medical degree in order to live and work in space. I think we're very quickly, and I think all of you will be a part of this, getting to the point where we need welders and plumbers and electricians and architects and gardeners and service workers for hotels and fixing the plumbing in a habitat, builders, right? We need all sorts of people to live and work in space, because if we're going to live and work on the moon, if we're going to live and work on Mars, and something more complicated than a simple soldering joint, or if our, something more complicated than a clog in our toilet happens, then we need these folks to be able to help us keep living and working on Mars, in space, on the moon, in all of these places that that we are exploring. And I'm really excited for that day, for when lots of people are going to space, when we're living and working in space, and when all sorts of people are needed there to help us work with that. So if you go on to the next chart here, we'll talk a little bit more about extravehicular activities and also about how you live on Mars and what the day-to-day life was kind of like. You heard me talk earlier about Trevor John's experiment where he was doing the virtual reality. On the far left there, you see Ashley. She's got one of our little drones that we had. And we would pilot this little drone to take videos, I'm sorry, little rover to take videos along the surface, and we would turn that into a 3D rendering that would be in our virtual reality goggles. Sometimes if we needed to do work far away from the habitat, we would get into these rovers, and you can see a few of us crew members there driving across the terrain, and we would use those to get farther away, much like what they did on the moon during the Apollo missions, and much like a lot of my colleagues are working on at the Aerospace Corporation, helping NASA plan what the next generation of rovers is going to look like. What will surface operations look like? But the other thing is that you still have to live and you still have to be a human being on Mars. And so how are you going to eat? How are you going to breathe? How are you going to go to the bathroom? How are you going to live and work with a bunch of other people in very close quarters? Well, you know, we had to basically plan our food such that the majority of what we ate was what we call shelf stable. It was something that you could pack up, launch into space, travel for 8 months to another planet, and then still be good to eat. So a lot of it was that freeze dried sort of food that you've seen, or flour, or you know, the powdered butter and powdered cheese and all this other somewhat unappetizing stuff. So we tried really hard to make it a little bit more appetizing. One of the things that I did is I make sourdough at home, and you can take your sourdough starter, which is usually living in a little jar in my refrigerator, spread it out, dry it out, and it turns into a set of shelf-stable sort of flakes. And so I brought that with me. We had water there, and I could reconstitute it, and I made pizza with the sourdough as the pizza crust, and then some of our freeze-dried tomatoes and some of the powdered cheese. And then we had this thing called the green hab, and this was essentially a greenhouse that was set up that we could grow fresh green vegetables, or, you know, carrots we planted while we were there, radishes. And when you spend 2 weeks eating nothing but, you know, powdered powdered milk and powdered grains and rice and all this other bland stuff, it's very, very nice every now and then to be able to eat something green. So that's kind of a little bit of how we would all, live and work together. At the end of every day, we would come back from our extravehicular activities. We would, have dinner. We would make dinner together. Then we would often spend our evenings writing up reports and sending them back. We had, again, very limited communications back to Earth, even though we were, technically also on Earth. But so we would have to kind of queue all of those up to send back, and then we'd have to plan our activities for tomorrow. And then it would usually be time to go to bed, but every now and then we would do things like watch a movie or play board games, or just have a good time while we were there. So a challenging thing to spend all that time really in close quarters and to spend a lot of every day working, but it was a really enjoyable experience and a lot of fun for us and for me and for the rest of my crew members and for all of those that helped us get there. So I think the last chart here is just kind of a pitch. I did a little interview and they turned it into this lovely little article on life on Mars. And for more information, you can read more about that. But at this point, I am very, very happy to hear from you or to answer questions, and to talk more about this fun and exciting mission. I think while we're kind of opening up, I will just say all of this that you do, working with rockets, obviously rockets are necessary to get to Mars, but even just the engineering that goes into building model rockets and to designing projects and all the rest. This is all critical to the work that we do in space and that we're going to be doing in space. So congratulations to all of you for being involved in the American Rocketry Challenge, for being interested in science, for being interested in space. And I really look forward to you guys coming into the workforce and helping us go back to the moon, go to Mars, go to the space station, and put the next generation of satellites into space. So I'll stop there, and then we can do questions.
Thank you so much, Barbara, and a quick round of applause for the presentation so far. And I know you guys are high tech and you can also do your little emoji reactions. Thank you. Barbara's going to answer some questions. Feel free to raise your hand using the little reactions at the bottom, or you're also welcome to put any of your questions in the chat and she's happy to answer them. Lots of clapping. Thank you so much. All right, it looks like Blake has his hand raised. Blake, go ahead and ask your question. You want to come off mute?
Yeah, I just want to point out that it says chat's disabled.
My apologies. Well, what we're going to do then is come off of mute. So sometimes when you are on Mars or on an analog mission, you have to pivot. So we're going to pivot this evening as well. Thank you so much, Blake, for pointing that out. So do feel free then to raise your hand and come off of mute to ask questions. And I know some of you submitted questions ahead of time, which were great questions. Barbara has some of those on hand if you don't remember what they were. Okay.
Okay, well, while we wait for all of you to come up with questions, please don't be shy. This is like the fun part of the meeting for me. You know, one of the questions that I did see to get is, what is the biggest challenge we encountered in that life on Mars experience? Well, certainly the toilet clogging up was one of the bigger challenges and the most smelly of the challenges. But truthfully, I feel like there were a few things that were a little surprising. One, again, was the sense of, boy, there really is nobody to call when we had to, remove filters and change out filters. We had to, the Mars Desert Research Station is powered predominantly by solar panels. One day we had clouds, right? And we were on this, I guess, would be the equivalent of having a windstorm or a sandstorm on Mars, and we had to really ration our power. We had to turn off all our lights. But the other thing too was the amount of planning that went into every hour of every day was really intimidating at first, and we kind of got the hang of it. But we had to plan these extravehicular activities. We had to get them cleared by our ground control, and then if the slightest thing went wrong, if our batteries on our spacesuits went down, or if we went out and we realized that we had forgotten something, then we had to come back in, and that threw the whole schedule off. So, it takes a lot of work and planning and a lot of, being able to pivot and discovering that, oh, okay, well, maybe if I put this, we didn't have the right things for the mirrors. So we're going to put that box into the airlock, and then somebody will replace it with the right box, and then we'll open up the airlock from the outside. Just a lot of right there and in the moment problem solving, and that's something you learn too while you're building rockets or while you're launching rockets. If you press the button and it doesn't go, then what do you do, right? That's the sort of skills that it takes to go to space.
All right, thank you. It looks like Valeria Sanchez, you've got your hand raised. Do you want to come off a mute and ask your question? And for others, while she's coming off a mute, I think I enabled the chat if you prefer to ask in the chat. So go ahead. Oh, you're on mute right now. I think still on mute.
There we go.
Oh, there you go.
So I just have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Is there going to be lunar colonies in preparation for Mars?
There are plans. In fact, NASA right now has something they call Moon to Mars, and they are looking really at not just how can we colonize and live on the moon and what kind of research we can do there, but how can we use the moon help us understand what it takes to live and work on Mars, because it's a lot easier to get to the moon, right? It's a few days journey versus several months journey to get to Mars. So yeah, that's in part what NASA is looking to do, and what some of my colleagues are helping them figure out. And it's a challenge. One of the interesting challenges of a moon colony is that if you think about the moon, right, it kind of, unlike a day on Earth, because the Earth rotates, the moon rotates too, but it rotates once a month, right? It's always showing the same face. So you've got half the month where you have no sun. So how do you power a moon colony, right? That's one of those challenges that they're looking to do, on top of how do you live and work in an environment that isn't built for humans, with gravity that isn't built for humans, and so forth. So lots of good things that we can learn by going to the moon in order to go to Mars.
Yeah, and hopefully some of these folks who are on here right now will be some of the first colonists out there. Yeah. All right. Ryan has his hand raised, and then we'll go. I saw a question submitted in the chat. So Ryan, do you want to come off of mute and ask your question?
So in your opinion, what is the most important skill for like space travel?
Good question. Yeah, I think you get a lot of different opinions, but I think a certain amount of resourcefulness is really, and a huge amount of curiosity and willingness to learn. I think that again, being able to find creative solutions to the problems that you encounter, and but almost more importantly, just a real interest in exploration and a passion and a curiosity about those problems, right? That's what fires you up to solve the problems. So, and I think those are the best things to cultivate if you want a career in space.
All right, thanks.
Great.
All right. I saw Dwayne, I think he posted a question in the chat. And do you want to come off a mute, or should I ask it? Give me a thumbs up if I should ask it. All right. Okay. He might be in a loud place. In astronaut training, do you also learn about the rocket and feel the fling in it? Feel the fling in it. Okay.
I feel the fling in it. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. You learn about the rocket, and for astronauts, that rocket is their spaceship, right? That is their ride. That is their ride or die, quite literally. So they have to know everything about it, right? They have to know what it's going to feel like, what it's going to do, how it's going to get them to where they're going. They have to know, again, if something goes wrong, what are the procedures you need to follow. But we all do. All of us that work in space need to know a lot about rockets in general. I've worked on both sides, where I've worked on the rocket side of getting things into space, and I've worked on the satellite side of getting into space, and I've worked a little bit on the human side of getting into space. But all of it is interrelated, because of course it's the rockets that get you to space, but a lot of those same things that help get the rockets to space: attitude control, making sure it's pointing in the right direction; navigation and dynamics to make sure it goes to the right place; propulsion to move around either from the Earth to space or within space. All of those things are similar, whether you're talking about a rocket or a satellite or the space station or a moon mission, and so and yes, you feel that same. I mean, I myself, alas, have never been on top of a rocket when it was launching, but you get that gravity pull. It's a little like, I have flown airplanes, and that if you go into a tight turn into an airplane, you feel that kind of gravity pulling you down in the seat. The same is true for a rocket. And then if you nose over on an airplane and you kind of go into that parabola, you feel a little bit of that weightlessness that comes once you've entered orbit and you're essentially in free fall. So I hope that answered the question for you there.
All right. Dwayne, did you have another question, or he was just saying all good? Okay. Oh, you do? Go ahead, Dwayne. Oh, we can't hear you for some reason. Yes. Work on your audio. While you're working on your audio, let's see. Nathan, why don't you ask your question next, and then we'll come back to you, Dwayne.
My question was during your, you showed a couple pictures of you in your suit that you wore while being outside. While in that suit, did you breathe just the air from the atmosphere, or did you have your own oxygen tank?
Yeah, we breathed mainly the air from the atmosphere, but it was, you know, basically just pulled in. Whoops. I think Dwayne has got his sound working there, but it's a little bit of feedback. But it did have a motor that basically pulled in air from outside and then spit it up into our helmets. So it wasn't like, you know, we had to have our oxygen tanks and they had to, you know, they had to compress that, and when our oxygen tanks got empty, we would have to go back inside. What we did have was a battery that was timed to be about the same amount of time as an oxygen tank, so that when it stopped pulling in that air from the outside, we would get a warning, and we would feel the air start to go down, and we knew we had to get back in. And again, it was those batteries that started malfunctioning, and so we would be out there and we'd be setting up, and suddenly we would not be able to stay out any longer, and we'd have to go back in. So yeah, an analog mission is rarely perfect, and there are others where they do. Like there's one version of an analog mission where the analog astronauts are actually under the ocean, and they sit inside of an ocean like vessel there, and so to go out they have to put on essentially scuba gear, and then they are carrying their own oxygen. So there's a lot of really creative ways that the whole you know, space business has figured out how to do these practice missions that mimic outer space in ways that you might find unusual, but which really help us learn.
All right. We have one question in the chat, and then we're going to go to Jayla, who has her hand raised. The question in the chat is from Sage, who wanted to know what are the career opportunities in this Mars research? So if someone wants to someday be you, Barbara, what are the opportunities for them?
Oh, there's a ton of opportunities. And like I said, I'm so excited to see all of you here, because one of the big things that I worry about in my career is actually making sure that we have people to continue this legacy of exploration. So, you know, you can, if you are really interested in Mars and in deep space exploration, you can obviously go into that, and you can study how, you know, how to equipment works on Mars. You can work on the rovers and the satellites that we're sending to go to Mars. You can work on the rockets that launch you to Mars. But even things like the geology of Mars, right? How did Mars form? How is it evolving right now? What kind of dirt is on there? What kind of mountains are there? How do those mountains form? The whole solar system has incredibly, really interesting geology there. So that's one way to do it. If you're into chemistry, the chemical makeup of the atmosphere of Mars, the chemical makeup of the surface on Mars, the chemical makeup of Venus, or the chemical makeup of the moon Titan, of one of Saturn's moons, Titans. All of those are fascinating areas of exploration. You know, if you are interested in engineering, there are a whole host of engineering problems that need to be solved that we talked about. You know, rovers, science experiments, how you build these things that can do these really delicate science, but can still, you know, survive the shaking and the rocket that takes you up there. That's a big engineering challenge. And if you're into medicine or that sort of thing, you know, how do human beings survive in gravity that isn't the full Earth gravity? How do we survive? There's radiation in space that is blocked by our atmosphere. How do we shield human beings and human bodies, which is very sensitive to that radiation, from that? So, and again, like I said, if you're interested in electronics, or if you're interested in, even if you're interested in gaming and influencing, right? This is all part of the story of space that we need to do, is figuring out how we communicate, figuring out how we keep people happy, telling the story to inspire the next generation. All of this is a way to bring your talent and your passion to the space business.
It's so good to hear there are so many different opportunities, and chemistry is one of my loves as well. So it's great to hear that there are possibilities. And my apologies, that question was from Blake, not from Sage. I saw Sage's name right here. So first we'll go to Jayla, and then we'll go to Sage. Jayla, go ahead and ask your question.
We have a question. Are there any possible plans to implement nuclear fusion into space?
Yeah, so it's interesting because yes, and NASA does launch a lot of what they're called radioisotope thermoelectric generators, and that's a lot of words. It's not exactly nuclear fusion, it's actually just radioactive materials that give off a lot of heat. And they use that to generate electricity. There's a lot of advantages to that because it doesn't require you to have sunlight, which we use solar cells and when you're in the 2-week night on the moon, maybe that's the way you get your electricity. Now, you know, anything that that involves nuclear fusion, radioactive materials, and so forth has a lot of safety requirements around it. So there is a lot of things that you have to do, and a lot of sorry, my other phone is ringing over here, and I need to tell it to go away. How do I? There we go. I decline the call. But so there's a lot of safety steps that need to be done. There's a lot of things that we have to do to make sure that that we don't, you know, injure any astronauts, or that we don't have anything that goes up into space that that could cause a problem. But it is actually one of those things that that is really interesting, especially for deep space missions, because it's a very reliable source of energy.
Sorry, I was muted. Now on to Sage. Sage, it's your time. Do you have a question you want to come off of mute and ask?
How long do you think it'll be until we put people on Mars?
Very good question. I don't know for sure. You know, we're planning to put people on the moon within the next 5 years or so. Mars is really, really challenging because you have to travel for 8 months there, and you have to shield from the radiation of that travel, and we have to figure out how to get enough of the materials that we need. But there are so many people who are so excited by this, and I think that, you know, it could be sooner than we think. So, you know, I will say 15 years. We'll go with that. I could be wrong. Maybe that's the over under, but that's my prediction. And in 15 years, you can let me know whether I'm right or wrong.
Fair enough. All right. We have a question from Ian, and then I have another question from behind the scenes. So Ian, why don't you ask your question? Then I've got one more.
Okay, so hang on.
Okay, Ian needs a minute. I have a question from behind the scenes. A young person wants to know, what is the most fun part of the mission? Yes.
From my mission to the Mars Desert Research Station?
Yeah.
That is a really excellent question. I really enjoyed the extravehicular activities. I really loved getting into the spacesuit, going out of the airlock, and being able to walk on the surface and kind of explore. And, you know, I was trying to keep my mind on the science we were trying to do, but sometimes you just have to kind of stop and look around and think this is just incredible. So that was amazing for me, and I really enjoyed that. And the crew was also amazing. It was great to spend time with these fabulous people, all working together to solve the problems of spaceflight, and to really kind of contribute to the learning that we can do for a potential Mars mission. So it was many things, but those are some of the highlights.
Yeah, thank you. It sounds really exciting. And I know that all of our ARC teams also, they've got their friends with them on the rocketry team, and have that same enjoyment working together for their mission. All right, Ian, you want to give it a try again? You have a question?
Yep. Okay.
Okay.
So what are the future international diplomatic plans for space?
Wow, that is a great question. And I won't be able to give you a thorough answer, but I do a little bit of work in my day-to-day job on space policy, right? And that is one of the big things that we think about is, okay, so does somebody own the moon? What does it mean? Would you be able to buy a house on the moon? What happens if people want to mine asteroids? Is that allowed? You know, if we go to space, who gets to go, and all the rest. So I think that number one, there's this thing that's called the Artemis Accords, right? And those are accords that were signed by a number of nations that say, here are some of the things that we will and will not do in space. And they build off of some United Nations policy that talks again about what we will and will not do. Even things like if a satellite re-enters and hits somebody on the head, who's responsible for that? But these are all international agreements, and so and they're all they're written within the limitations of the technology of the time. And so there are questions that we don't even know the answers to when it comes to things like space policy and, what does it mean internationally if a bunch of different countries have bases on the moon? Are they all their own countries? Or is it the moon kind of like the ocean, right? Is it like a common resource for all? Is it like Antarctica where you do research together? So I kind of think that's the way it's going to go, is that we're going to have it be almost like a commons. But again, this is me speaking from where things are right now, and in 100 years, right, it could all look very different.
All right, looks like we have maybe one last question from Dwayne. Why don't you go ahead?
Why is it echoing so loud? My question is, sure.
Like they're in the same room and getting some feedback from each other's computers.
Yeah, okay. Here he is.
Hello. My question is, I forgot my question. Where'd my question go? Where'd my question go? I'll pull it up. I'm forgetting this.
Come on,
No
Dwayne.
problem.
Come on, Dwayne.
Dwayne, the rock jump.
Okay, no worries, no worries. Why don't you put it in the chat, Dwayne, if you
Yeah,
find it. Oh, you found it. Okay, go ahead.
I put it in the chat.
Oh, okay, yeah. The one that you put in the chat says, do you get a certain, you were asking Barbara, do you get a certain say in the rocket design as an astronaut?
Yes, well, and so as an astronaut in general, right, you get a certain amount of say. So again, I went on an analog mission. There was no rocket that actually brought me there. We drove there, but as astronauts, as we're having worked with astronauts and having worked on rocket and spacecraft design, the astronauts do get something of a say, but it's mostly on where they're going to be living and where they're going to be sitting and so forth. Many of the astronauts are also very talented engineers and have come up through the ranks of working on rockets, working on satellites. Maybe they were, electronics experts or computer science experts and so forth. So they've had a say from the perspective of their careers. But I think it's often some of those details. I mean, again, building a rocket, when you're talking about the size of rockets that we need to go to the moon and the Mars, can never be a one person job, right? There's literally thousands of people who work to bring those missions to life. And so the astronaut is just one of those many thousands of people. And certainly they have a lot of say over what works for them in terms of comfort, and also what works for them in terms of solving problems and knowing the status of the rocket and all the rest. But so do many, many hundreds of other people have a say in what's going to be the most efficient way to use the fuel, and how do we do the guidance and the navigation, and how do we make sure that everybody stays safe.
Yes, thank you. It's a team sport for sure. Space is a team sport. All right, well, I have one last question for you, Barbara. And my question is, how has everything that you've learned, the skills, the lessons learned, knowledge, how might that, what would you say to a rocketry team? How might they be able to use something that you've learned as they're building their rockets?
I think part of it would be that there's always many ways to solve problems. So if your rocket design isn't working out the way you would expect it to, don't give up, keep persevering, right? You can probably think through and brainstorm and use your creativity to overcome that problem. Talk to your friends. Like, again, rocketry is a team sport for big rockets and small rockets. leverage the people around you and talk to them, and they may have ideas to how to fix problems. And you know, always maintain your enthusiasm and your curiosity for this. You know, this is the answers are out there, and the solutions are out there, and there's no one right answer, but there are dozens and dozens of right answers. And if you keep your passion and keep hunting for them and don't get discouraged, and you know, you learn sometimes more from failure than you do from success. And that's a big theme in my entire career that I have always come from, is don't get discouraged by failure, right? These are all, there's like a Michael Jordan quote that talks about how many times he missed the winning shot, and how many times he failed to score a point, and how many games he lost. And he keeps, I failed and failed and failed again, and that is why I succeed. And that is exactly the same attitude that you should take into rocketry. That curiosity, passion, teamwork, and you will learn a ton, and you'll have a great time, and then you will ultimately succeed.
Thank you so much. That's great advice as we go on. Let's give Barbara another round of applause. Thank you so much for joining us. It's just, your talk is so inspiring, and it's just really unique work that you've done. And we hope that many of our students are going to follow in your footsteps. So thank you.
And a big applause to all of you for being curious and for having passion and for doing these types of things. I always love these talks because it makes me so happy for the future of space.
Thank you so much.